The Cathari ambassador didn't realize he was about to witness history. He thought it would be another tedious session watching the humans grovel, plead, and bargain like every other species did when faced with the sovereignty's demands. After all, that's what civilized beings did. They negotiated, compromised, surrendered territory and pride in exchange for survival. Ambassador Thrensuck settled his 6 limbs into the gravitational cushion, his chitinous faceplates clicking with satisfaction. Across the obsidian negotiation table sat the human delegation, and Thrensuck felt a familiar contempt rise in his thorax. 3 of them, just 3, to face the assembled might of the Galactic Sovereignty Council. The human in the center was unremarkable by any metric Threnok understood. Her name was Astrid Kovač, some mid-level diplomatic functionary from Earth's Outer Relations Bureau. No military decorations visible, no ceremonial scarring, no bioluminescent threat displays. She wore a simple gray suit that seemed almost deliberately plain. Her companions were equally forgettable. A young man named Jorah Chen with nervous eyes, and an older woman called Esperanza Reyes, whose weathered face suggested too many years in artificial gravity. "Let us commence," Threnok announced, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into flat, authoritative galactic standard. "The Sovereignty has reviewed Earth's petition regarding the Kepler 422 colonization rights. We find your claim lacking in legal precedent." Astrid said nothing. She simply folded her hands on the table. "The system falls within the Cathari expansion zone as ratified by the Treaty of Ascending Civilizations," Threnok continued. "Your species arrived there a mere 8 cycles ago. Our claim precedes yours by 200 cycles. You hadn't been there in 193 of those cycles," Astrid said quietly. Threnok's mandibles spread in what his species considered a smile. "We're relevant. Precedent is precedent. However, the sovereignty is not without mercy. We understand you've invested resources into the colony. We're prepared to offer compensation." "No." The word hung in the recycled air of the station like a foreign substance. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 sovereign species shifted in their various seating configurations. The Drexeli observers' sensory tendrils curled inward. The Yothran delegation exchanged glances through their compound eyes. Threnok's translator buzzed uncertainly, as if questioning whether it had processed the human's response correctly. "Perhaps I was unclear. We are offering—" "I heard you perfectly," Astrid interrupted. Her voice remained level, almost conversational. "My answer is no. Kepler 442b remains human territory. Our colony stays. Your claim is rejected." A strange sound rippled through the chamber, something between a gasp and a hiss, rendered in dozens of biological formats. No one interrupted negotiations like this. No one rejected sovereignty rulings outright. That simply wasn't how civilized species behave. Threnok felt his secondary hearts accelerate. This was either breathtaking stupidity or something far more dangerous. "You seem to misunderstand your position. The Cathari Defense Fleet currently has 16 warships in that sector. Your colony has defensive capabilities suited for asteroid deflection and pirate deterrence. At best, you have 40,000 civilians on that world, Ambassador Kovač. Surely you don't wish to endanger them through pride." "It's not pride." Astrid's expression remained unchanged. "It's principle." "Principle doesn't stop plasma torpedoes," Threnok said, allowing menace to creep into his tone. "Neither does precedent." Astrid leaned forward slightly, and for the first time Threnok noticed her eyes. They were brown, deep as gravity wells, and utterly without fear. "Let me explain something about humans that your intelligence briefings apparently missed. We spent 10,000 years killing each other over strips of land, ideological differences, and resources we could have shared. We nearly made our own planet uninhabitable. We've committed atrocities that would make your conquest records look like children's games." Jorah Chen shifted uncomfortably beside her. Esperanza Reyes remained perfectly still. And then Astrid continued, "We stopped. Not because we became weak or lost our capacity for violence. We stopped because we chose to negotiate, to compromise, to build institutions that resolved disputes without bloodshed. We joined your galactic sovereignty because we believed it operated on those same principles." "It does," Threnok said defensively. "No, it operates on the principle that might makes right, dressed up in the language of legalism. You use precedent and procedure as weapons. Knowing that younger species lack the political capital to challenge you, you engineer disputes to expand your territories, then offer generous compromises that still give you everything you actually wanted. It's exploitation with paperwork. The Drexeli observer spoke up for the first time, their translated voice like wind through hollow reeds. Ambassador Kovač, surely you're not suggesting the entire sovereignty system is corrupt? No, not entirely. But corrupted in specific ways that benefit the founding species at the expense of newcomers. Absolutely. Astrid's gaze swept the chamber. We've been studying you all for 30 years now, learning your systems, your precedents, your customs, and we've realized something important. You've all forgotten how to say no. Threnok's carapace bristled. You're out of line. I'm out of patience, Astrid corrected. For 3 decades we've played by your rules. We've negotiated in good faith, compromised on mining rights, accepted unfavorable trade agreements, and swallowed our pride when your species treated us like children who should be grateful for your guidance. We did all of this because we wanted to be good members of your galactic community. She stood up, and somehow the simple act carried weight that made several delegates flinch. But we've been watching how you treat species who can't defend themselves. The Mirathi lost their homeworld's moon because they couldn't afford the legal fees to challenge your claim. The Poltheren were forced to abandon 3 colony worlds that your species wanted for security purposes. The Venn Collective, a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel independently, was reduced to client state status because they didn't understand your bureaucratic warfare. Those were all legal proceedings. Threnok protested, but his voice had lost its certainty. Legal according to rules you wrote, Astrid said. Laws crafted over millennia to ensure outcomes favorable to the powerful. But here's what you've forgotten, Ambassador. Laws only matter when people agree to follow them. And we're done following yours. The chamber erupted. Delegates, speaking over each other in a cacophony of translated outrage, confusion, and, from a few, poorly concealed satisfaction. The Yotheran Prime representative managed to override the others, their booming voice cutting through the chaos. This is unprecedented. You cannot simply reject sovereignty rulings. Watch us, Astrid said simply. You'll be expelled from the sovereignty, Threnok warned. Your species will lose access to trade networks, defensive pacts, scientific exchanges. You'll be isolated, possibly, but we'll be isolated with our principles intact. Astrid gathered her data tablets. We're not leaving the sovereignty. You'll have to expel us, which requires a vote you don't have the support for. But we're done pretending your rulings have any authority over us. Kepler 422b is ours. We discovered it, we settled it. We've invested blood and resources into making it livable. Your ancient dormant claim means nothing. The fleet, Threnok began, can come, Astrid finished. We know you have 16 warships in the sector. We also know exactly how old those ships are, their weapons configurations, their crew complements, and the fact that 13 of them haven't seen real combat in over a century. Your military is designed for intimidation and policing, not actual warfare. Jorah Chen spoke up for the first time, his voice shaking slightly but determined. Our colony has 40,000 civilians. As you noted, it also has 12,000 veterans of the Centauri pacification. Soldiers who fought rogue AI battle platforms in the ruins of dead civilizations. Every single adult on that planet knows how to shoot, how to improvise explosives, and how to make every street, every building, every tunnel a death trap. Esperanza Reyes added in a grandmother's gentle tone that somehow made her words more chilling. We've also been manufacturing weapons for 30 years. Not defensive satellites. Actual weapons. Railguns, nuclear devices, relativistic kill vehicles, and some other things we learned from studying the nastier periods of galactic history. We've been very good students. The silence that followed was absolute. Threnok felt something unfamiliar crawling through his consciousness. Not quite fear, but its cousin. You're bluffing. Sovereignty monitoring would have detected military buildup. Would they? Astrid smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. We're a species that split atoms before we left our home planet. We fought wars with weapons that could glass continents. You think we forgot how to hide things from inspectors? We've been compliant and peaceful because we chose to be, not because we had to be. This is madness, the Drexeli observer whispered. No! Astrid said. "This is clarity. You've been negotiating with a version of humanity that was trying very hard to be civilized. You're now facing the version that's done trying. We'll still honor our legitimate agreements. We'll still engage in fair trade, respect actual diplomatic protocols, and participate in genuine collective security. But we're finished being bullied by bureaucratic thugs hiding behind ancient legal frameworks." She moved toward the exit, her companions following. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at Thrinna. "Send your fleet if you want, but understand something. We're not the Marathi or the Palteran. We're not scared of you, and if you push us, you'll discover that the scariest thing in this galaxy isn't the species that never learned restraint. It's the species that learned it perfectly and then chose to set it aside." The door sealed behind them with a soft hiss. For nearly a full minute nobody spoke. Then the Othran Prime representative broke the silence. "Did she just threaten the entire sovereignty?" "No," said a small voice from the back of the chamber. It belonged to an elderly Venn delegate, one of the few remaining from before their species' subjugation. "She just reminded us what real sovereignty looks like." Thrinna sat frozen in his gravitational cushion, his mind racing through scenarios. The human was right about the fleet. They were old ships, designed for show and light peacekeeping. A determined resistance from a prepared colony would be costly, perhaps prohibitively so, and if humans truly had been manufacturing weapons for 3 decades. But worse than the military calculus was something else, something that made his blood run cold. The example. If humans simply refused to comply, if they weathered whatever punishment the sovereignty could deliver, how many other species would find their courage? How many client states would suddenly remember they had teeth? The sovereignty's power had always rested on a simple assumption that civilized species would rather compromise than fight. They maintained order through the threat of force. Yes, but more importantly through the weight of tradition, precedent, and the universal understanding that everyone played by the same rules. The humans had just flipped the table. "What do we do?" asked a junior Cathari official, his voice plates clicking nervously. Thrinna didn't have an answer. For the first time in his long career, he genuinely didn't know what came next. In orbit above the conference station, Astrid Kovač stood in the observation lounge of the human transport ship, watching the stars and sipping terrible coffee. Jora Chen joined her, looking shaken. "Did we just start a war?" he asked quietly. "Maybe," Astrid admitted. "Or maybe we just prevented one. Hard to say. The things you said about our military buildup were mostly true," Esperanza cut in, appearing beside them. "We have been preparing, not for conquest, but for the day when someone pushed too far. Today was that day." Some of the delegates looked terrified. Jora said. "Good," Astrid replied. "Fear creates respect. We've been too busy being likable. Sometimes you need to remind the galaxy that humans are dangerous when we choose to be. And if they call our bluff." Jora pressed. Astrid turned to face him fully. "Then 40,000 people die, our reputation is destroyed, and we probably get expelled from the sovereignty anyway. But I don't think they will. Rentubang is a bureaucrat, not a general. He'll send his report up the chain. The Cathari Council will convene emergency sessions, and they'll spend the next 6 months debating whether humans are crazy enough to follow through." "Are we?" Jora asked. The older woman considered the question seriously. "I hope we never have to find out. But the thing about deterrence is that it only works if the other side believes you might actually do it. So yes, if we have to be, we're that crazy." Esperanza pulled up a holographic display showing galactic news feeds. Already reports of the confrontation were spreading through unofficial channels. The reactions were predictably mixed: outrage from sovereignty hardliners, quiet admiration from subjected species, concern from moderates who worried about destabilization. "This will have consequences," Esperanza said. "Not just for us, but for every species watching." "I know," Astrid said. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. For too long, the sovereignty has operated on the assumption that everyone will keep playing their game. Someone had to break the pattern." "Why us?" Jora wondered. "Why did it have to be humans?" Astrid smiled grimly. "Because we're uniquely qualified. We've been the bullies before. We built empires on exploitation and dressed them up in the language of civilization. We know all the tricks because we invented most of them. And that means we can spot them when someone else uses them on us. There's another reason," Esperance added softly. We're expendable. In a way, we're new to the galactic stage. If this goes badly, the sovereignty can make an example of us without destabilizing the core powers. But if it goes well, other species will follow, Jorah finished. Understanding dawning. This isn't just about Kepler 442b. It was never about Kepler 442b, Astrid confirmed. It's about establishing that there are limits to the sovereignty's authority. That legal precedent isn't a magic spell that makes theft acceptable. That younger species have the right to exist on equal terms, not as client states waiting for scraps from the founder's table. She drained the last of her coffee and set the cup down with finality. We didn't stop negotiating today. We just stopped negotiating from a position of assumed weakness. From now on, if the sovereignty wants something from us, they'll have to offer something we actually want in return. That's not aggression. That's just fairness. Back on the conference station, an emergency session had been called. Representatives from the founding species clustered in private chambers, trying to formulate a response. The debate was heated, perspectives fracturing along predictable lines. The Cathari delegation wanted immediate military action. Send the fleet, crush the colony, make an example that would echo through the centuries. The Drexali urged caution, pointing out that creating martyrs often backfired spectacularly. The Yuthrin tried to broker middle positions that satisfied no one. But in the public galleries, where junior diplomats and observers from client species gathered, something else was happening. Quiet conversations. Exchanged glance data tablets discreetly sharing files about human military history, about Earth's own path from tribalism to global cooperation, about the careful difference between strength and aggression. A young Mirathi attaché named Kellis whispered to her supervisor, "They said no. Someone actually said no." Her supervisor, old enough to remember when the Mirathis still controlled their own moon, simply nodded. "And the sky didn't fall. Yet," Kellis added nervously. "Yet," the supervisor agreed. "But maybe it won't. Maybe that's the point." The news spread faster than light, carried by quantum entanglement communicators to every corner of sovereignty space. In the Pultharen home system, crowds gathered in planetary squares to watch the footage. In Ven collective territories, underground networks shared the recordings with commentary that officials tried and failed to suppress. And in the Cathari Strategic Command, military planners ran simulation after simulation, each one coming back with the same uncomfortable conclusion: a ground assault on a fortified human colony would be expensive, bloody, and potentially catastrophic for morale. The humans weren't bluffing about their veterans, and intelligence reports confirmed at least some of their claimed weapons development. But more than the military calculus, something else troubled the Cathari High Command. It was the look in the human ambassador's eyes, not hatred, not rage, but calm certainty. The look of someone who had counted the cost and accepted it. The look of someone who genuinely wasn't afraid. That was new. That was dangerous. Admiral Kreshtar, commander of the Cathari Second Fleet, stared at the tactical displays and felt a strange respect forming. "They learned," she said to her assembled officers. "Somehow these newcomers learned the lesson we forgot." "Ma'am?" her executive officer prompted. "That respect isn't given, it's taken." Kreshtar tapped the display, magnifying the Kepler 4.2 system. "We've spent centuries building an empire on the assumption that everyone would keep following rules designed to benefit us. The humans just reminded us that rules without enforcement are suggestions. So we enforce them," another officer suggested. "With what?" Kreshtar challenged. "We're talking about species that survived their own nuclear age, that fought wars of extinction and chose to step back from the brink. They know things about warfare that we've forgotten because we haven't needed them. Look at their history, truly look at it." She pulled up human military records, the files that were public knowledge, but rarely examined in depth. The world wars, each killing tens of millions. The Cold War, two superpowers poised on the edge of mutual annihilation for decades. The resource conflicts, fought with weapons that made sovereignty armaments look quaint. The AI uprising, where humans fought sentient machines in a war that nearly ended their species. "They've been fighting advanced wars since before we achieved faster-than-light travel," Kreshtar continued. "And they won. Every time, against every threat, they found a way to win. Do we really want to be the next entry in their military history texts?" The silence in the command center was absolute. Recommendation, the executive officer asked quietly. I'm filing a report suggesting we accept the loss of Kepler-42b and focus on renegotiating terms that don't leave us looking weak. The system was marginal anyway. We wanted it purely for strategic positioning. Is it worth a war that could undermine the entire sovereignty structure? The Council won't like that. The Council, Krester said dryly, doesn't have to watch soldiers die for worthless real estate. I do. Similar conversations were happening across the sovereignty power structure. Not all of them reached the same conclusion, but enough did. A consensus was forming, not through agreement but through collective recognition of new reality. The humans were serious, and pushing them would have consequences that extended far beyond one colony world. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Ambassador Threnok found himself doing something unprecedented, requesting a private meeting with the human delegation. Not a formal negotiation with recorders and witnesses, just a conversation. Off the record, as the human said, they met in a neutral garden habitat, one of the station's recreational zones, where genetically modified plants from 100 worlds grew in carefully managed chaos. Astrid Kovač arrived alone, which somehow made Threnok more nervous than if she'd brought security. Ambassador, she greeted him with a slight nod. No formal bow. No subordinate gestures. Equal to equal. Ambassador Kovač. Threnok gestured toward a walking path with 2 of his limbs. Will you walk with me? I find the greenery helps clear the mind. They strolled in silence for a moment, passing beneath trees that shouldn't exist on the same planet, let alone the same path. Finally, Threnok spoke. You've created quite the situation. Have I? Astrid's tone was carefully neutral. The Cathari High Council has been in continuous session for 3 weeks. The military is divided. Conservative factions want your colony destroyed as an example. Pragmatists argue that the cost exceeds the benefit. And there's a third group, he paused, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. A third group that wonders if you might be right. Astrid said nothing, letting him continue. I've been a diplomat for 40 cycles, Threnok said. I've negotiated treaties, resolved disputes, and helped maintain the sovereignty's stability through careful application of precedent and pressure. I was good at my job because I understood the system, but you made me question whether the system was worth understanding. Is this an apology? Astrid asked, not unkindly. No. Perhaps. I don't know. His frustration bled through the translator. You were right about the Mirathi, and the Poltaran, and dozens of other instances where we used legal mechanisms to achieve outcomes that were objectively unjust. I knew it at the time. We all did, but the system worked, maintained order, prevented wars. Isn't that worth some inequity? That depends, Astrid said, on whether you're the one being treated inequitably. They reached a small pond where bioluminescent fish from the Drexeli homeworld swam in lazy patterns. Threnok watched them for a moment. I've been assigned to find a resolution to the Kepler situation. My superiors want me to offer you a compromise. You keep the colony but acknowledge Cathari oversight and pay resource royalties for the next century. No, I haven't finished. You don't need to. The answer is no. Astrid turned to face him directly. We're not paying tribute disguised as royalties. We're not accepting oversight that gives you veto power over our development. The colony is ours. Full stop. Then we're at an impasse. Are we? Astrid's expression softened slightly. Or is there a third option you haven't considered? Which is, you could just let it go. Officially recognize our claim, set the precedent that discovery and active settlement trump dormant ancient claims, and move on. Use this as an opportunity to reform the system rather than doubling down on its flaws. Threnok's laugh came out as a series of harsh clicks. You're asking me to help dismantle the power structure my entire civilization benefits from. I'm asking you to help evolve it into something fairer. Your civilization will survive without exploiting newcomers. In fact, you might find that treating other species as genuine equals makes you more secure, not less. Why would we be more secure? Because right now, half the sovereignty is waiting for someone strong enough to challenge Cathari dominance. We're sitting on a powder keg of resentment, held in check only by the fact that no one else has the military power to oppose you. Astrid picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the pond. disturbing the fish. But what happens when they do? What happens when 3 or 4 client species decide to pool resources and challenge you together? That's not how galactic politics work. It wasn't how they worked, Astrid corrected. Past tense. We changed the rules by refusing to play. Others will follow. You can either get ahead of that change or get swept away by it. Threnok felt something shifting in his understanding. Pieces rearranging into uncomfortable new patterns. You're not trying to destroy the sovereignty. Of course not. We like the idea of the sovereignty. A genuine collective of equals working together for mutual benefit. We just hate the reality of what it's become. And you think it can change? I think it has to change, Astrid said firmly. The galaxy is getting more complex, not less. More species reaching the stars. More resources in dispute. More potential for conflict. You can't manage that with a system designed to benefit a handful of founding members. Eventually, something breaks. So you broke it first. We broke the facade, Astrid corrected. The system was already broken. We just forced everyone to acknowledge it. They walked in silence for a while longer. Threnok found himself genuinely considering her words, examining assumptions he'd held for decades. It was deeply uncomfortable. If I bring this proposal back, official recognition, no oversight, reformed precedent standards, the conservative factions will accuse me of weakness. Some will call for my removal. Probably, Astrid agreed. Leadership is often uncomfortable. But you asked me earlier whether maintaining order was worth inequity. I'll ask you a similar question. Is maintaining your current power structure worth inevitable conflict with species who won't stay subordinate forever? Threnok's mandibles clicked in agitation. You're asking me to choose between my civilization's short-term interests and its long-term survival. No, I'm suggesting those might be the same thing. And your short-term thinking is what's threatening long-term survival. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. You're either the bravest diplomat I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? Astrid smiled. Look, Ambassador, I know this is hard. We're not asking you to become revolutionaries overnight. We're just asking you to consider that fairness isn't weakness, that treating other species with genuine respect might actually strengthen the sovereignty rather than undermining it. And if we don't, then eventually someone will force the issue. Maybe not us. Maybe we'll lose this particular confrontation and be expelled from the sovereignty. But others are watching, learning, realizing they have options beyond compliance. You can either adapt now under relatively controlled circumstances, or wait for someone less diplomatic than me to force the issue. Less diplomatic? Threnok's translator rendered something like amusement. You threatened the entire Sovereignty Council. I stated uncomfortable facts in strongly worded language. Astrid corrected primly. That's still diplomacy, barely. Despite everything, Threnok found himself making a sound that translated as laughter. This strange human, with her inflexible principles and her willingness to risk everything for them, was growing on him in ways he didn't fully understand. I'll take your proposal to the council, he said finally. I can't promise anything. That's all I ask. But understand this. If I fail, if the hardliners win, there will be consequences. The fleet will move, people will die. I know, Astrid said quietly. Believe me, I know. I haven't slept properly since that confrontation, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. But some things are worth risking everything for. Dignity. Sovereignty. The right to exist on our own terms. Even if it cost 40,000 lives, they volunteered, Astrid said. Every colonist on Kepler 442b knew the risks when they signed up. They went anyway because they believe in something bigger than themselves. That's what you've never understood about humans. We're not fearless. We're terrified most of the time. But we'll walk into the fire anyway if we think it's right. Threnok studied her for a long moment. You're all insane. Frequently, Astrid agreed cheerfully, but we're effectively insane. There's a difference. As they parted ways, Threnok found himself genuinely uncertain about what would happen next. The smart move was to recommend military action, crush the human colony, and maintain Cathari dominance through fear. That's what his training, his culture, and centuries of precedent told him to do. But something else nagged at him. The memory of that elderly Venn delegate's words. She just reminded us what real sovereignty looks like. The galaxy was watching. And for the first time in his long career, Ambassador Threnok wasn't certain which side of history he wanted to be on. 3 months after the initial confrontation, the Galactic Sovereignty Council convened in full session. Every member species sent their highest-ranking diplomats. The public galleries were packed to capacity. News networks across 200 systems broadcast live. This was it. The moment that would define the sovereignty's future. Astrid Kovač sat in the human delegation box, flanked by Jora Chen and Esperanza Reyes. She maintained an expression of calm confidence, but her hands were clenched beneath the table where no one could see them. Everything rode on the next hour. The Yothern Prime representative called the session to order with a resounding strike of their ceremonial gavel. We gather to address the dispute between the Cathari Expansion Collective and the Human Federation regarding territorial claims in the Kepler 442 system. Ambassador Threnok of the Cathari will present his delegation's position. Threnok rose, his movements more hesitant than usual. Around the chamber, species leaned forward in anticipation. Would this be a declaration of war? A humiliating retreat? Something entirely unexpected? Esteemed representatives, Threnok began. I come before you today, not to demand compliance, but to acknowledge reality. The Cathari Expansion Collective has reviewed its claim to the Kepler 432 system and determined that active settlement by humans supersedes our dormant historical precedent. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. This was not what anyone had expected. Furthermore, Threnok continued, his voice growing stronger, we propose a reformation of precedent standards throughout the sovereignty. Specifically, we suggest that dormant claims, those not actively maintained or developed for more than 100 standard cycles, should be subject to forfeiture when another species establishes active settlement. The chamber erupted, delegates shouting over each other, some in outrage, others in cautious approval. The Yothern representative struck the gavel repeatedly, calling for order. This is madness, the Drexeli observer shouted. You're proposing we dismantle centuries of legal framework. I'm proposing we update centuries of legal framework to reflect current realities. Threnok countered. The galaxy is more crowded than it was when these precedents were established. We need systems that encourage active development rather than hoarding territorial claims. A senior Palteran delegate spoke up, their voice carefully neutral. And what of worlds already seated under the old precedent system? That, Threnok said carefully, is a question for further discussion. But I would suggest that justice delayed is not justice denied. It may be possible to revisit certain historical inequities. Astrid felt something loosening in her chest. He'd done it. The Cathari ambassador had actually proposed meaningful reform. Not everything they'd hoped for, but a genuine start. The debate raged for hours. Hardliners from several founding species argued that accepting human defiance would undermine all authority. Moderates suggested that codifying clear, fair standards would actually strengthen the sovereignty by giving it moral legitimacy beyond mere force. Client species watched with barely concealed hope, wondering if this might be their chance for justice. Finally, the Yothern Prime representative called for a vote on Threnok's proposal. It required a supermajority to pass 2/3 of all member species. The silence as votes were tallied was absolute. Esperanza gripped Astrid's hand beneath the table. Cora had stopped breathing. The proposal passes, the Yothern announced, with 73% support. The sovereignty's precedent standards are hereby reformed to prioritize active settlement over dormant historical claims. Implementation details will be debated in subsequent sessions. The chamber exploded again. But this time the character of the noise was different. Still chaotic, still loud, but with an undertone of possibility rather than pure outrage. Astrid felt tears threatening and blinked them back. They'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, they'd actually done it. Across the chamber, Threnok caught her eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She returned it. Later, in a crowded reception hall, species that had barely acknowledged human existence previously sought out the delegation. The Marathi wanted to discuss appealing their moon's transfer. The Palteran asked about legal frameworks for challenging old claims. The Venn Collective's representative simply shook Astrid's hand and whispered, "Thank you for your courage." Esperanza sidled up beside Astrid with a glass of something alcoholic. "You realize what you've started, right? A bureaucratic nightmare that will take decades to fully implement?" Astrid guessed. That too. but also a real chance at genuine galactic democracy. These reforms won't fix everything, but they're a start. Jorah joined them, looking shell-shocked. I still can't believe it worked. We were so close to war. We're still close to war, Astrid cautioned. There are hardliners who will resist every step of implementation. Some species will refuse to recognize the reforms. It's going to be messy, but it's possible now, Esperanza said. That's what matters. A week ago, reforms seemed impossible. Now it's just difficult. Difficult I can work with, Astrid agreed. Ambassador Threnok approached their group, looking exhausted but oddly satisfied. Ambassador Kovač, I wanted to thank you for threatening your entire civilization, Astrid asked wryly, for reminding us what we'd lost. He gestured vaguely at the crowd around them. We've spent centuries maintaining power through precedent and pressure. Somewhere along the way we forgot that real authority comes from legit